but then we come to Europe, the Eurozone, and Iceland, and which is applying to join the euro. Some see the euro as a future solution for Iceland. Some do not. And of course, the euro is in a frightful mess at the moment.
Indeed, I would hope that the euro is a future solution for the euro.
Yes,
because it is, as you say, in a frightful mess at the moment. Let's go back to that little story I was saying about you had the problems with the banks that landed on the state, and then you have the taxpayers here and the bondholders here. Well, this is actually the problem with the euro. Step back a minute. The idea of a European Union is fantastic. It's one of the greatest achievements that Europe has done, because war with France and Germany is now unimaginable.
Yes.
We know that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And for 1,000 years it did. That's fantastic. And we managed to integrate everything east of the Elbe with almost a shot not being fired. The Balkans will put out for one moment, right?
Yeah.
So these are tremendous political achievements. But the economics behind it have always been secondary to the politics. Why did we have the euro? It was ultimately the price that France extracted to get the Germans to bind themselves to Europe when they reunified. It was about Kohl and Mitterrand putting their names in the history books. And when you do this, the economic rationale just isn't there. So go back to this thing. You've got the state and the taxpayer, etc. So you've got these very nervous sovereign bondholders, and they know there's a risk that they could lose everything. And you've got taxpayers here who are saying, I'm paying for everything.
Yes.
So these two are on collision course. Now, let's say at some point someone in Portugal says, enough, no more austerity.
Yes.
Almost happened yesterday.
Yeah.
Right, what are we going to do? Well, if I'm holding lots of sovereign bonds from Portugal, I'm going to go, bye, I'm out of here, and you start dumping them. If I do that, that's a signal to everyone else to dump them. And then, to cover your losses, you might say, well, let's get rid of the Irish at the same time.
Yes.
And then you begin a bank run through the European bond market that goes all the way back to the exposures of Germany and France, which are 22% of GDP and 33% of GDP, respectively, in the bonds that they hold in these peripheral countries. This is politics all the way through. It's very bad economics. Now, will the euro survive? You know, you'll know in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So when you're ready to make that choice, coming out of this crisis, when you're ready to get rid of capital controls, you'll be in a great position to judge. I'm just very glad that Iceland doesn't have to do it next week.
Yes. So, well, there is a question, of course. The farmer in Finland paying for the Greeks.
Yeah.
This is there are infinite tensions within the system.
Of course,
and then the Greeks being stifled by the euro at the moment, and
the Irish being very resentful of the Germans for reasonable reasons. All of those things. And remember, the principle of Europe is solidarity. It doesn't seem to be very much about solidarity at the moment. It seems to be lots of different national interests trying to make sure that they're not the one holding the bag when it goes wrong.
Yes. I read on the internet, and you were talking about the big picture. I read on the internet that you were working on a book called The End of the Liberal World.
Yes.
It's a huge title.
It's a huge title. I've scaled it down. It's actually now called something far less dramatic. It was called Schumpeter's Paradox.
Yeah.
And the idea behind it is very simple. At the end of the Golden Age, around 1975, when we went from 45 to 75, we had no financial crises in the developed world. Everyone was growing at 4, 5, 6, 7%. Wages were going up in real terms. The bottom end of the income distribution was going up, the top was going down, and the whole economy was growing together. That's why we called it the Golden Age.
Yes.
And then the magic went away. And different countries tried different ways to bring back the magic. And one of the ones that Iceland did, but they were quite late to the show, but Britain did and America did, was to financialise everything.
Yes.
To basically turn the country into a big financial enterprise zone. Well, Joseph Schumpeter was an economist in the 30s, had a wonderful phrase most people have heard of called creative destruction, right? Well, here's the question. What happens when your rate of destructive creation gets faster than your rate of creative destruction? That's what the book's about. And the question I hope to answer is, are globalised banking systems that are based in discrete nation states machines of destructive creation or creative destruction? And I think that's a fundamentally important question to ask.
Of course, you describe yourself as a child of the Thatcher area.
Yes. So
that's where you learned your economics.
That's where you learned it. You know a lot about destruction if you grew up in Britain in the 1980s. That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
But again, on this one, I think if we had Mrs. Thatcher here today, I think she'd be horrified by the banking crisis. Because her version of liberalisation and privatisation was to free up the entrepreneurial spirit of a nation. It was to basically allow finance to invest in real industry not to lever up 35, 40 or 50 times and turn into a money pump, which when it blows up becomes a put on the taxpayer.
Yes.
I think she'd be horrified by what happened.
But then the big question is, if we don't have austerity, how do we sort of unwind? How do we reboot the system? How do we...
Well, this is a big problem, particularly for very financialized economies. Think about it this way. How do banks make money? At the end of the day, they've got three strategies that hang together. The first one's called fattening your trading book. What does that mean? It means you don't make enough money from customers. You trade with other people who are like you. They're called counterparties. And you do lots of trade and you charge each other fees. Well, to make that profitable, your fees are very small, so you're going to have to do a lot of them. Well, how do you do that? You get lots and lots of leverage. And then you cover all this with what are called out-of-the-money options. They're insurance policies. It's like buying CDS protection on Lehman Brothers. It's an income stream and it will never go bad until it does. Yes. So this is the business model. Now, all of it is contingent upon having essentially a cheap or perceived to be cheap or underpriced asset going in the bottom. Houses, equities, commodities, whatever it happens to be. It's not clear that we have that anymore as the fuel to restart that particular engine. So how do we get out of it? I'm heartened by some of the things that I see in Iceland. I know that there's contractions every quarter since the financial crisis. But if you look at the real unemployment rate of the United States by its measure U6, it currently sits at around 16%. Even factoring in the emigration that's lowered your unemployment rate a bit, you're doing about 5 points better than the United States. You have the right demographics. You have an incredibly skilled young population. You've got natural resources in abundance. That's what's going to bring you back, not some short-term government program to either boost or cut the economy for the most vulnerable members of society. That's got nothing to do with it.
So, Mark Black, thank you for coming to Silfur Egils. Þetta var, síðasta efnið í þættinum mínum í dag. Ég þakka ykkur fyrir að horfa. Verð þér að viku leiðinni.